right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So in this video, I want to count down my top 5 most genetically gifted bodybuilders. Now in this video, I want to talk specifically about bodybuilders that had the best ability to put on muscle easily, and also the quality and roundness and fullness of their muscles, that 3D effect, that it doesn't matter how hard you train, it's just something that you either have or you don't genetically. Now coming in at number 5, I want to talk about a bodybuilder by the name of Matt Mendenhall. Now, many of you guys might remember Matt Mendenhall because a lot of people refer to him as an uncrowned Mr. Olympia. Matt Mendenhall was a competitive bodybuilder primarily from the 1980s. Now, many consider Matt to be the greatest bodybuilder to never earn his IFBB Pro card. Obviously, in these photos you're looking at here, he looks like he is certainly an IFBB Pro caliber physique, especially for the 1980s time period. You would probably assume that he was a pro bodybuilder just looking at these photos, but he in fact was not. So from that standpoint, we're looking at Matt as one of the bodybuilders with the greatest genetics of any amateur bodybuilder ever. Now, he would compete at the NPC Nationals and attempt to earn his pro card a whopping 7 times. Now, most notably, in 1982, he would lose to Lee Haney at NPC Nationals. He would take second, and Lee Haney would win. And he would only lose by 1 point to Lee Haney, who would go on to be an 8-time Mr. Olympia, one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time. And from that point forward, Matt Mendenhall would struggle and never turn pro. His placings at Nationals would drop. 83, he would place 4th. 84, he would bump back up to 2nd. And a combination of injuries, illnesses, and some other factors would contribute to him never earning that pro card. Now, some people say, and this is heavily speculation, that Matt Mendenhall didn't necessarily take some of these NPC Nationals very seriously. There's a lot of rumors out there that Matt Mendenhall liked to party and liked to drink. And for that reason, there were many occasions where he didn't take Nationals prep seriously, and that's why he didn't earn his pro card. Not because he didn't have the genetics, not because he didn't have the physique, but because possibly he didn't take it as seriously as he should have. And that would be a perfect example of the age-old quote, hard work beats talent, when talent doesn't work hard. Now coming in at number 4, I have Big Ramy. Now, earlier in this video, I said we're going to talk about bodybuilders specifically that had the ability to put on a large amount of muscle. Drugs are a factor, diet is a factor, but also genetics are a factor in how much muscle you can put on your frame. And Big Ramy clearly has the genetics that many bodybuilders do not have. Standing at a height of 5 foot 10 inches tall and frequently weighing over 310 pounds on stage, getting as heavy as 350 or 360 in the off season, achieving a size that many bodybuilders his same height will never even come close to. He's won a slew of IFBB Pro shows, taking 2nd at the 2017 Mr. Olympia. The only problem with Big Ramy would be that conditioning. When he finally nails that, I think he's going to be able to do a lot of amazing things. But talking sheerly about genetics for bodybuilding, genetics for putting on muscle, I think it doesn't really get much better than Big Ramy. Of course, in the past, we've had bodybuilders like Greg Kovacs who have been able to put on an insane amount of size, insane amount of muscle. But Big Ramy's been able to do it in a way that is proportionate enough, it looks good enough, it looks aesthetic enough that he could take 2nd at the Mr. Olympia. So not only is he putting on tons of muscle, he's putting on muscle in the right places, and he's putting on quality muscle. And there's definitely a difference between quality muscle and just sheer muscle and size. So I think Big Ramy is a secure top 5 for most genetically gifted bodybuilders. Now coming in the number 3 spot, I have Dexter Jackson. Dexter Jackson, in my opinion, is one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time, period, genetics aside. At the age of 48 years old, Dexter Jackson has competed at the Olympia 19 times. Dexter Jackson has essentially won every single bodybuilding title that you could set out to win. He won more Arnold Classic titles than anybody else in the history of the Arnold Classic. Dexter Jackson is one of the only 2 bodybuilders to win both the Mr. Olympia title, which he won in 2008, and the Masters Mr. Olympia title in 2012. And even more impressive, not only would Dexter win that Masters Mr. Olympia, which is essentially for the older bodybuilders back in 2012, he would go on to compete all the way up until 2018, still being a top threat at the regular Mr. Olympia. And he is one of the few bodybuilders over 40 to get better with age, placing second at the 2015 Mr. Olympia, improving his Olympia placing as he got older. The previous year at the 2014 Mr. Olympia, he had taken fifth, so he moved up 3 places all the way to second in his mid-40s, which is considered, basically the end of a bodybuilder's career. So he's doing things that bodybuilders simply had not done before. Now, when we put Dexter on this list, we're not necessarily looking as heavily at the ability to put on muscle. We're looking at the ability to retain muscle and the ability to continue to compete as he gets older and older and still place very, very well. This is something that has proven to be a very rare phenomena in professional bodybuilding and something that only Dexter has been able to do in his mid to late 40s. So Dexter certainly deserves props for that. And that's certainly something that genetics has a heavy, heavy role in. Even though he's not the biggest bodybuilder from a muscle mass standpoint, he's been able to retain that muscle through an age that most bodybuilders will never be able to do. Also worth mentioning, Dexter Jackson has won more bodybuilding titles than any other professional bodybuilder. Now, coming in my number 2 spot, I have Phil the Gift Heath. Now, who is a more fitting bodybuilder for genetically gifted bodybuilders than a bodybuilder whose nickname is The Gift? Now, Phil Heath, whether you like him or not, is one of the most genetically gifted bodybuilders of all time. The 3D look that his physique has is something that simply cannot be trained for. This is something you either have or you don't genetically. And you can tell from looking at early photos of Phil Heath early in his bodybuilding career, even before his bodybuilding career. If you look at his basketball photos, you can tell that from a very early age, Phil Heath had the genetics to be a bodybuilder. He had that roundness and 3D look to his muscles even before he pursued bodybuilding. Now, even though Phil would draw a lot of criticisms from fans and critics alike, Phil Heath did win 7 Mr. Olympia titles. Phil Heath does have some of the best arms and delts in the history of professional bodybuilding, one of the best backs in the history of professional bodybuilding. And even though Phil Heath's midsection draws a lot of criticism, I think it's one of the reasons he should be included on this list, because Phil's genetics for bodybuilding are so good that even when he came in with that midsection problem, the rest of his body was so good and so complete, he still won the Mr. Olympia title while having that issue because his physique was so superior. And I think when we see Phil Heath return to the bodybuilding stage, the Olympia stage, whenever he chooses to return, whether that be in 2019 or 2020, if he's able to regain that title, I think he will be cemented in bodybuilding history as one of, if not the most, genetically gifted bodybuilders of all time. Now, coming in the number 1 spot, I have 8-time Mr. Olympia, Ronnie Coleman. Now, I have Ronnie Coleman in number 1 and not Phil because I feel that Ronnie Coleman had a freak factor to his physique that no other Mr. Olympia ever had, including Phil Heath. Now, Phil Heath is an amazing bodybuilder, an amazing Mr. Olympia that could be considered his contemporaries. Phil Heath, Jay Cutler, Dexter Jackson. None of these guys, not even Jay, was close to 300 pounds on stage at the Olympia. And then when you talk about a version of Ronnie Coleman, like the 2003 version of Ronnie, where he came in and just destroyed everybody. He came in bigger than ever, grainier than ever, harder than ever, and just blew everybody else out of the water. When in years past, people were talking about Ronnie Coleman, being off, being kind of the end of his era, then he would come in 2003 and just destroy people, looking like something no one had ever seen on a bodybuilding stage before. I believe 2003 was the heaviest he was on a bodybuilding stage as well. So Ronnie Coleman is number 1 on my list of genetically gifted bodybuilders because really, of freaky physiques, things that don't even look human, things that look alien. I think Ronnie Coleman is the king of that, no pun intended. And he is a record-holding Mr. Olympia with 8 Mr. Olympia wins. Now, I would like to make a couple of honorable mentions in this video for most genetically gifted bodybuilders. I would say guys like Dorian Yates, Marcus Rule, Victor Richards. I mean, these are guys that also had this insane ability to put on a crazy amount of muscle mass. But I think the genetics of the bodybuilders on this list were superior to the genetics of those guys because a lot of those guys, even though they had good genetics, they had to really train extremely hard to bring out the best in their physiques. Whereas I think a guy like a Ronnie Coleman or a Phil Heath or even a Dexter Jackson wouldn't have to train nearly as hard to look half as good. So let me know in the comment section below who you would include on your list of most genetically gifted bodybuilders. Thank you guys for watching the video, and please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.